Hi, I'm Dr. Ray Lybrand, and I want to welcome you to Why Do the Demons Tremble? Well, we're going to get to that. It's not so much a story about demons as it is about James 2, about the issue of faith and works. What is dead faith? Yeah, why do the demons tremble? Why did Abraham take 30 years from when he believed in God originally to offer Isaac? Well, these are some of the questions we'll look at. But what I want to do is actually walk through the entire passage. Now, for context, I want you to understand that there are two major views out there on this passage in James 2. And what I'm offering here is a third view. And so this debate has raged for about 500 years. And so we're going to take it up a proverbial notch. So my background is I have a doctorate in applied theology. I have friends that have other kinds of doctorates, PhD exactly type doctorates, and I've told them, I said, so I got a doctorate in applied theology, which means you have a doctorate in unapplied theology. Well, we're all dying by degrees, so that isn't really a thing. But it does tell you, I hope, that I've spent some time working on the academic side. So I got a background in logic and debate and structural dynamics and linguistics and hermeneutics, all these fun, fancy words. I pastored formally for 25 years. And really, I dabble in a number of things that all come together here. I've written 9, 10 books, and I hope more to come. I'm really enamored with words, but I'm even more enamored with the Christian life. There's a preacher by the name of Phillips Brooks who wrote O Little Town of Bethlehem. And in his lectures to Yale forever ago, he told those listening that you need to figure out what you're trying to save people from. And that makes a difference. You look in our culture, and some people are trying to save people from, I don't know, poverty or oppression or identity, sexual identity issues. Inside of Christianity, the most traditional thing has been to save people from destruction to heaven, something like that. My driver personally is I want to save people from themselves. So my interest is especially on spiritual growth and maturation. How do we really grow up to walk well with God? Well, I'm going to tell you, James tells us how to do that. And we often mistake James because in this 500-year debate, we come at it from certain theological orientations. And that orientation really drives the way we try to understand this passage. And I'm inviting you to, suspend your disbelief in me or this view until I've walked through the whole thing. Because I think what you're going to find is that I've tried very carefully to stay within James. So I'm working hard at not bringing in outside into it to tell it what it means, but try to make sense from within. Doesn't mean I accomplished it. Doesn't mean I don't have biases too. But when we come in with a theology and we say it must mean this, we're not unlike things I've seen in football. So I found my wife at the University of Alabama, graduated from there, went to law school there a bit, taught communications, and watched a lot of football games, did as I grew up in Alabama. And what I noticed is when a referee calls a controversial penalty against my team, then what I say is, no fair, bad call, you're blind, can't you see? Is he paid off? Something like that. Now, if it goes the other way and they call a bad penalty, let's say, against the opposing team, let's say Auburn, Then it's all you always justified. Hey, that's the way the game goes. The ref's the ref. That's it. Well, it's the same thing. When we come to a passage and we say it's got to match my theology, then we can start adjusting what's being said to match. So, really quickly, before we get into this passage on faith and works, think about the two sides. So, historically, there was originally, as it evolved in time or developed, the Roman Catholic view of James 2 in particular. And the Roman Catholic view basically comes down to a theological orientation, if I'm representing it well, of seeing people accepted into God, into his family, and ultimately his heaven by means of grace, and in particular faith. Their emphasis would be on the sacraments, things like your initial baptism, the role of communion or the host, or the Lord's table, however we might frame that. And in this context, their orientation is that faith is essential. And faith, I would say it this way, gets you into the game. You're in a context of God's favor. However, works are important to add to that context for a couple of reasons. The first is, if you are not careful to add works to this standing you have, having come into the Catholic Church, accepted, let's say, by grace and faith, your parents' faith, that has entered you into a context of this community and relationship. If you're not careful to maintain that, and they would say works are a means of maintaining it, well, you can fall into a mortal sin. And a mortal sin kind of kicks you out of being in the context of good grace. And so you're back into a hopeless state. So the value of works, in part, is to help maintain that status or situation or circumstance or standing, we might say. There's a second thing in the Catholic view, and that is that works will actually reduce your time in something they refer to as purgatory. And so purgatory is a time after this life where if you need it, and pretty much everyone does, I think there are saints that skip the process, but if you need it, you've got to be cleaned up, made holy, sort out the wrong you did in this life, etc., in this intermediate place, so that you can get to a state of holiness, so it would be appropriate for you to actually enter heaven. And so works actually help in that regard. It cuts down on the judgment, but we'll call it sanctifying effect of purgatory. And so works in the Roman Catholic system has those two pieces that make sense of what's going on. The Catholics in particular would say things, and like the Council of Trent, that being assured of our eternal destiny in heaven is not something we should do or should offer to other people, because you can't be assured of that given a mortal sin. So that is kind of the orientation. They also would say, especially in this Council of Trent way back, that they would emphasize that it's also not that if you have faith, then the works will naturally occur, that they're kind of a fruit or outgrowth of the faith. So they would see faith as a distinct thing, and then works as a distinct thing, and these in combination affect that protection against mortal sin and reducing the necessity or time spent, however, in purgatory. Well, on the other side, in the Reformation, beginning with Martin Luther and a bunch of these folks, they began to develop a different orientation, because they came to a conclusion that we are we came to a conclusion that we are actually saved eternally from the moment that we believe in Christ. And so sola fide, or faith alone in Christ alone, became their clarion call, such that this sola gratia, sola gratia, sola fide, faith alone, doctrine or understanding, put them in an interesting spot when they looked at James, because now if your orientation is to think James is talking about an eternal salvation, but it says you need works, what do you do with that when you've established that works are not required for eternal salvation? So, for by grace you've been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, is a gift of God, not of works, that none should boast. Ephesians 2:8 and 9. Romans 4 says much the same thing, looking at Abraham, and Paul stressing that it was by faith apart from works. So they step into James, and James has a lot of emphasis on works, if you've ever read it. And that emphasis on works is a bit of a problem if it's faith alone. So they took a tack to say something to the effect, a cliche was developed, that I did my dissertation work on in a book you can find called Back to Faith. And the basic phrase or cliche was, we are saved by faith alone, or justified by faith alone, but the faith that justifies is never alone. So that became kind of their orientation. And in that understanding, what they were saying is that if you, sorry about that, if you, in that orientation, if you, I'll cut this out, obviously. In that orientation, what they were saying is that if you have true faith, or genuine faith, or authentic faith, then you would, of necessity, have works show up. Because in their understanding, different than Roman Catholicism, was that works are an outgrowth of genuine faith. They are the fruit, and faith, we'd say, would be the root, something like that. So that they saw a cause and effect relationship, that if you had faith, it would produce works. And so in that understanding, you'd look at someone's works and conclude whether or not they had faith. And that orientation made them, and that's right, made them look at James certainly in a different way. So where the Catholics would see works as separate, but works as important and necessary for final salvation to arrive in heaven, the Reformers would also tend to see works as necessary for final salvation. So if you arrive and you have no works, they would say you never had original faith. So both of them arrive in a similar spot. Now, what we're going to do is look at the book of James. And I'm going to try to share with you the basic ideas in my book, Why Do the Demons Tremble?, which is offering a third view of James regarding faith and works. So this third view, bottom line, is a view that says James is not talking about eternal salvation. He's not talking about getting into heaven. He's actually talking about how we live our lives in the here and now. And understanding it that way means that James is talking really about spiritual growth, not about how to arrive in heaven, and not a debate about if you have true faith or not true faith or something like that. So this orientation, bottom line, is going to be a conversation about Christian integrity. And I think this is actually the way most of us think about it. If we used a phrase like, faith without works is dead, what we generally mean is that if you believe something and don't act on it, what good is it? And I think that's what James is going to tell us, but we're going to spend some time really appreciating why he does that. So that's the setup for looking at this passage.